Hello everyone, welcome to the Zach F1 channel, and today I am joined by a very special guest, that is Matt Bishop. Thank you very much for coming on to the channel.
Formula 1 was so much less popular. You had a choice. You either had to buy the Daily Telegraph, which not many 10-year-olds bought even then, let alone now,
Yeah.
and seeing somebody get on and open up the Sun newspaper, and the back page it just said, "It's Hunt." I remember thinking, my sport is actually in the newspapers in a proper way. I couldn't believe it. By 1978, all the races were on the television, and then we had
Was that straight onto the BBC?
BBC.
Yeah.
BBC, not always all live, and not always, and often the highlights, depending on the race. Formula 1 had arrived in a big way.
Yeah.
And Bernie Ecclestone had worked out how to make it make money and make himself make absolutely enormous stuff.
Yeah.
So I've been at Car Magazine, and I love cars and motor racing.
Yeah.
So I've been at Car Magazine for about 5 years, and it's a small little world, the motoring and motorsport press in the UK. So we used to meet each other on car launches, new car launches. So I knew all the Haymarket people, and Steve Cropley and Mel Nichols, who was senior at Haymarket, which published F1 Racing, they reached out to me, sorry, that's an Americanism, but we'll have to live with it now, and said, would you like to come and be the first full-time editor of F1 Racing? So that was in late 1996, and I arrived in December 1996. I think they had done about 6 issues, so I arrived at that time. So we turned it round into a story which I remember all these years later, which I think it was called Why Senna Was Obsessed with Prost.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And we turned the story round, edited it so that it was that way round. Front covers in those days were crucial because the only way you could promote your magazine was what it looked like on the newsstand.
Yeah.
Front cover is an ad. It is an editorial page, but basically it's an ad because the potential buyers are walking through the newsagent, whether it's a newsagent or at a station or an airport or wherever it is.
It's got to catch their eye,
It's
yeah.
got about a second or two to catch their eye. So we found a great image of Senna. Senna, big letters, one word, why he was obsessed with Prost. And it was the best-selling issue we've done so far. Big jump. And when I started at F1 Racing, it was sold in one language, English, and in one country, the UK. By the time I left, 11 years later, in 2007, a group of great people, had altered that. It was on sale in 34 languages in 110 countries. Well, Chief Communications Officer of a team or anything, or an editor or a journalist in a magazine are two sides of the same coin. Now, if you're an editor or a journalist working on a magazine or a newspaper, on a website or on a blog or doing podcasts or doing the kind of thing that you're doing, YouTube videos, and when you cross to the dark side, which means you go into comms and PR, he or she, usually with a team, and at McLaren there was a big team, very well funded then as now, and we basically just, when I arrived, we had Lewis Hamilton, great asset, obviously, brilliant driver, but we'd arrived I had arrived in the wake of a terrible year, which was 2007, when the cars had been good on track, and Alonso and Hamilton had both won 4 races and almost won the Drivers' World Championship, but didn't. But McLaren got fined $100 million for illicit and unauthorised use of 780 pages of Ferrari IP. McLaren had press officers, good ones, but they didn't and had never hired a strategic comms director. So they were ill-defended by the aggression of Woods and Coliani. It was at the Turkish Grand Prix in 2007. I was a journalist, still working as the editor of F1 Racing. And I knew Ron quite well by then. I'd been in the editor's chair for 11 years, and I'd interviewed him frequently, and I think he somehow thought I was an all right person, or a clever boy, or a good writer, or something like one of those 3 things. Anyway, he said, come and see me. And so I went into the big black McLaren brand centre, as it was called, and went to see him. And he was always miserable at that time because every time he woke up, he had an email saying, "We've been shat on again." In the press."
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
and everything was going wrong. So he said, "Come and work for me." And he first offered me a job, actually. He and I had lunch at Manucor in 2001, and he'd offered me a job, but it wasn't the right job and it wasn't the right money. But this time his back was at the wall. Back was to the wall. And it was a more senior job, and it was more senior money. I was in a lucky position because he needed someone who he knew, liked and trusted. Trust being incredibly important to him at that very difficult time. He needed someone who knew the Formula One paddock, who knew the Formula One media scene. He also needed someone who understood what made Max Mosley tick, and I did. I'd interviewed Max Mosley many times. In fact, you could actually say I employed Max Mosley as a columnist. He did 12 columns in 1 year for F1 Racing. So really, if you have the Venn diagram of the people Ron knew and trusted, people who knew and understood Formula One media, and people who knew how Max Mosley particularly ticked, there's 7.5 billion people in the world, and those three Venn diagrams land up with one person in the middle. Just me. First race of the season, Australia, and then we won the Monaco Grand Prix, which has always been the jewel in Formula One's crown. And then, as you know, I mean, I'm not going to run through the whole 2008 season, but I must admit, I could, without Googling anything, I could tell you almost absolutely everything, because I went to every race, I lived and breathed it, and I was in the Interlagos garage on the last lap.
I was going to say, I think we could speak about that for about 3 hours, that one lap.
Just amazing. Just absolutely amazing. Heikki wasn't going to be renewed, his contract, but obviously Lewis was. So who is going to be the teammate? And in charge were Ron Dennis and Martin Whitmarsh. He was in favour of Nick Heidfeld, and not a bad driver.
That would have been very interesting.
Yeah, Nick a good driver, by the way. Probably one of the best Formula One drivers never to have won a Grand Prix. Not the best, that's Chris Amon, but one of the best Formula One drivers never to have won a Grand Prix.
Yeah.
And there were others of us that were in favour of Jenson Button. And I remember Martin saying, but Jenson's not going to be available, Matt. You know, he's just won the World Championship for Brawn, which he had, brilliant achievement. And Mercedes have bought Brawn, and obviously they're going to just keep him on. I said, I don't think so. I had to broker that meeting, and in came Jenson late on a Friday evening and walked around the factory. We did it late on a Friday evening so that there wouldn't be that many staff there. Yeah. So the rumour wouldn't get out. And I remember Jenson walking around and because the McLaren Technology Centre is very impressive. And in those days, it was unrivalled in terms of how impressive.
Especially as, even though Brawn did win the championship, I know their facilities were very much underfunded. Completely different two worlds.
Totally. And Jenson was just walking around and looking like that. And I remember he just said, why don't you win every race? Which was quite a good question. Yeah. Anyway, he agreed to join. So I wrote the press release, and I think we told Mercedes, I'm going to say half an hour, quarter of an hour before we issued it. And Nick Fry, the bosses at that time were Ross Brawn, Nick Fry, Norbert Haug, Mercedes corporate side. Yeah. And Nick Fry was livid to be pushed onto the back foot in that way. So my view is I'm positive about Drive to Survive. I know I'm not the target audience. But I understand that not all comms initiatives and programs around Formula One should be targeted to me. Why should they be? Yeah. I'm a 61-year-old F1 lifer who's been around the sport for a long time, and my support and enthusiasm for it is probably guaranteed. I can't really imagine a life without following Formula One in one shape or another. Having worked in it for 33 years, it's part of my life. But the worry, I think, was that the demographic of the fan base was ageing. Yes. And very male. And Drive to Survive has been absolutely fantastic. By the way, the credit for it, the idea, it was a man called Sean Bratches. I remember him saying, which do you think we should put it on, Amazon Prime or Netflix? And we had a discussion, and I remember saying, I'm not an expert, but I remember saying, you know, for me, I've got both, I watch both, but Amazon Prime still to me seems like, and I'm talking about then, might be less now, still to me seems like something you buy things on. We agreed to go for Netflix, and he pitched it, and it happened. But you remember the very first year of Drive to Survive, Mercedes and Ferrari refused to take part.
I remember that, yes.
They thought it was absolute waste of time and nonsense. And then, you know, it turned out to be not a waste of time and not nonsense. It turned out to be enormously successful, and it did absolutely reach and inspire those three new demographics. Youngsters, women and Americans. I think the cars are too ugly and too big. Particularly too big, too long. You know, in my day, I know now is still my day.
Yeah.
But when I fell in love with the sport in the 70s, a Formula One car, let's say a beautiful Ferrari 312T, 1975 car, that was as long as, you know, Ford Focus now. The Ferrari this year, it's as long as a long wheelbase Mercedes S-Class. I'm not exaggerating.
Wow.
That is the difference in length. They're not, by the way, wider. They're just longer. You know, if you look at a photograph from the Monaco Grand Prix in the 60s, you could go 3 abreast round the Lowe's hairpin.
Wow.
Now you almost need a 3-point turn to get round at all on your own in one of these cars. They're too big. They're too ugly. I think that I do hope that the new Formula is a more exciting engine, and maybe people will be annoyed with me to hear this, but I do think they should sound better. I mean, Lawrence Stroll is a real petrol head. He's a real petrol head. I mean, not a terrible driver himself. I mean, he was never going to become a Formula 1 driver or a professional racing driver. And he was, you know, super focused on business, which he's done extremely well at. And he really loves cars, and he really loves motor racing, and he really loves his son. And by the way, that's also a feather in his cap, because who criticises a father for loving their son? So that's the background. When he realised that his son was quick, and by the way, let's just press pause here, because some people watching will say, oh, he's not very good, Lance Stroll. Actually, he is good. He may not be as good as Max Verstappen, but then there's quite a lot of drivers who are not as good as Max Verstappen.
Well, yeah, it's very hard to compare him when his teammates, Fernando Alonso, 2-time world champion,
one of the best in recent decades. So, you know, one of my best friends of the current grid is Kevin Magnussen. Well, he's not as good as Max Verstappen either, but his dad's not a multi-billionaire, so he doesn't get the same kind of criticism for it. Anyway, so there you are. Sorry, Kevin, if you're watching, but there you go. Lawrence Stroll also loves Aston Martin, the brand, and loves road cars. So when he realised that he could buy a majority, the largest single shareholding in Aston Martin, and do his best to turn it around, because it's been a great company for more than 100 years, and it's made some great cars, but it's never made any money. Not in 100 years. And if he thought, if I can do that, continue to make great cars, build the brand and make it profitable, which is a difficult job which he's still engaged in. And if I can then buy a team and call it Aston Martin, and the race team can promote the road cars, and the road cars can promote the race team, and call them both Aston Martin, and he did that because he bought Racing Point, and indeed brought me in to do the comms and PR for a couple of years, 2021 and 2022. Then I've got an opportunity to give my son a Formula 1 career, create a business, a franchise, and by the way, he probably wouldn't have done it if there hadn't been a budget cap. Because the budget cap means that you can, you know, spend 140 million or whatever it is now, rather than 340 million, which makes a huge difference. And promote my road cars and make my road cars profitable. That's the theory. I remember a young person writing into me saying they had some problems, quite difficult problems, challenging problems. And I remember telling Seb about it, and he was not just an Aston Martin fan, but a Seb fan. And I remember Seb saying, right, what can I do? I said, well, why don't you do I'll do a little video of you in your, on my iPhone now. And we can post it on the Aston Martin social media things, and you can say, this is a message for so-and-so, and say the name.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, no, I don't want to do that, because that will look like I'm showboating and trying to show off.
Yeah.
He said, can you do a Zoom call or Teams call with him and talk to him, and then I'll just walk into the frame and join. And it will just be then a private thing.
Yeah.
So I said, yeah, I can do that. So we did do that. And I thought he'd walk in and talk for 5 minutes. He walked in and talked for 25 minutes to this young man who was bowled over that his hero was not only talking
fully
to him,
made his day.
Yeah, probably made his week or his month.
Yeah.
And not only talked to him, but talked to him for 25 minutes. And also had bothered to learn. Matt tells me you've had this happen, and you've had this happen. Actually we all have troubles. I've had troubles in my life, says Seb, talking about himself. Very humble. And he is, personally, of those 4 world champions, I would say I've enjoyed working with all 4 of them. But the 2 I've enjoyed working with most, with great respect to Alonso and Button, are Hamilton and Vettel. Obviously, earlier this year, it was announced that Ferrari had hired Lewis Hamilton for 2025. And it was a big shock in many ways, and a huge story. But I happened to have discussed that with him some years ago when I was at McLaren. Obviously, he and I had worked together at McLaren for 5 years. I joined in 2008. He'd already had his first year there. 2007, and we worked together very closely, actually, until he left at the end of 2012. But I continued. I stayed at McLaren. Anyway, we were in a bar in Tokyo. The Japanese Grand Prix is unlike other Grand Prix because often the day after, people don't hurry out. It might be a back-to-back, in which case you fly on to somewhere near. But even when it wasn't, people don't always hurry home. They want to have a day in Tokyo because Tokyo is a great city. And Suzuka isn't a great city. So, a bit like Silverstone. Silverstone's a village, but London's a great city.
Yeah.
So, Suzuka's, nothing special, but Tokyo is mega. So a lot of the Formula 1 people often want to spend the Monday afterwards in Tokyo. That happens. And because it's a big sport but a small travelling village, you end up congregated in the same places. So surprisingly, you then rub shoulders with each other. And it was always special in that way. Anyway, there was a particular bar, which I think is closed now, in Roppongi, which is a district of Tokyo.
Yeah.
And I was there with my McLaren colleagues, and then some Williams people came in, and some Red Bull people came in, and various other people. And then in walks Lewis with some Mercedes engineers. And, you keep to yourself a bit, but then as the beers go down, you might then start chatting, call the Williams guys over, or you start mixing and having a laugh. And some of you have worked together before anyway. It just so happens that you used to work together, and then he left and worked for Williams when you used to be at McLaren, so on and so forth. So anyway, Lewis came over and said hello to us, just generally, hello guys, and we were crap at that time. McLaren Honda wasn't going well, and obviously he was winning everything.
Yeah.
I'm thinking it would have been about 2014, something like that. But anyway, it was whatever I wrote, because I checked my diaries. So I wrote about it. But it was that kind of time. Maybe 50, maybe 2050, something like that anyway. But he was winning everything, and we were doing hopelessly. And anyway, after a while, Lewis and I splintered off and started having a tete-a-tete, a bit of a chat, only for 5-10 minutes. And I remember saying to him, would you ever come back to us, McLaren? Would you ever? And he said, well, never say never. I still look out for you guys. Amazingly, when they, after qualifying, and I look at the screen and I see, am I pole or did Nico beat me? So I'm P2, because he was either P1 or P2 most of the time at that point. So, I checked that. And then I don't know why, I always just scan down to find you guys, because McLaren always still means something special to me. Yeah. And I know I have to scan a long way down these days, and it slightly breaks my heart. And so we talked a bit about McLaren. He said, well, there might have to be certain changes, or there might have to be this, but, never say never. But what I really want to do is win a championship or a few more championships with Mercedes, and then go to Ferrari. That's what I really want to do.
A few years ago, I say a few, about 12 years ago, I would have been about 8, 9, 10 years old, and of course we've mentioned my auntie.
Yes.
I was a Jenson Button fan, and she asked you to get Jenson Button to sign a hat directly to me.
There you go, and there it is.
Yep, and this is the exact hat that you gave to Jenson Button, and he put to Zach, and he had the signature.
He did indeed, and I can tell you that is a genuine signature because I know his signature very, very well. Yeah, Jenson's a great guy.
I just want to say thank you very much for it, because it's one of my most treasured gifts I've
ever
got.
Go on, put it on.
Yeah. Yeah.
There you go. How about that?
Perfect.
Let's have an applause for Jenson.
Yeah. But anyway, yes. Thank you so much for coming onto the channel. It was lovely. It was a pleasure to have you on it.
It's been a pleasure to chat to you, Zach. And
Yeah.
I wish you luck with the channel. I wish you luck with your career.
Thank you
And
very
I
much.
wish you luck with everything.
And I wish you luck with everything going on, Diagonal Comms. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. And I'll see you all later for the next video that is on the Zac F1 channel. Bye bye.